I'm Jana.
And I'm Carol.
And this is the Real Talk Recreation Therapy Podcast.
On this podcast, we talk about real experiences and real research that back up the use of recreation therapy as a method of treatment for a variety of populations.
We try to keep it real as we address concerns and successes that we and other recreation therapists have had as we all navigate this awesome career field.
We don't have it all figured out, but one thing we know for sure is everything gets a lot easier when you can talk it out with a friend.
Hey everybody, welcome back. We are excited to continue our discussion on TR models of practice. This is the how of how we do practice. We are not going to give you an overview of all of the models of TR, but after we did the first two, we thought we should follow up with two that we feel have been brought up a lot. They're very popular. They really build off each other. So today we're going to talk about the leisure and well-being model, and we're going to talk about the flourishing through leisure model. So, bit of history about these models. The big theoretical framework for these is positive psychology. Positive psychology was introduced by Dr. Martin Seligman. And these models kind of follow how his theory has developed over time. So when he first introduced his theory and printed his book, Authentic Happiness, let me back up a little bit. Positive psychology is the study of what makes things go right. So all through the history of medicine and psychology, we've been saying, why are things broken? What is wrong? And positive psychology says that maybe strengths have their own pattern. And so maybe it's worth it to study strengths, not just weaknesses. So positive psychology is the study of what makes life worth living, what makes things go right, what is good. And initially this theory relied heavily on positive emotion and engagement and positive relationships. And so you'll see that in the leisure well-being model. And if you want to dive deep into the theoretical framework for that, you can read Dr. Martin Seligman's book, Authentic Happiness. And so I'm going to talk about the leisure well-being model, but then just know that this model is going to be built upon as positive psychology develops. So as positive psychology develops, he shifts from the focus being happiness, well-being to flourishing. And Carol will talk a little bit about that. So there's your history lesson for that. If you want to look at these books, Authentic Happiness is like the initial one. And then Flourish is the name of his newer book. It came out in 2012, but his newer book that really goes through the current model of positive psychology. Okay, so the leisure and well-being model. This model says that, so it has goals for treatment that they call distal and medial goals, medial and proximal goals, which is kind of not strange. At first we were like, okay, that's very anatomically, but what they mean by distal goals is just like your long-term goals, your end goals. Medial goals are the middle ones, proximal goals are the short term. So it's really not that complicated. I was overcomplicating it in my head. So
yeah, it just made me think of anatomy.
Yeah. So in this model, the end goal of therapeutic recreation treatment is positive affect, positive emotion, positive affect, like appearing positive, and cultivating one's full potential, which is well-being. The medial goals include enhancing leisure experience and developing resources. So this also relies heavily in leisure theory as well. And so if you think about the past models that we're talking about, where they were leisure ability models, really heavy on let's enhance leisure, and maybe the health promotion, health protection model is more heavy on let's enhance well-being. This model and many future models in TR are going to just openly decide that both are important and combine the two. So that's what this one is. So enhancing leisure experience and developing resources. And then within those, there are smaller ones. So under the umbrella of enhancing leisure experience, we have savoring leisure, authentic leisure, leisure gratification, mindful leisure, and virtuous leisure. Don't worry, I'll explain what all of those are supposed to mean. And then under developing resources, we have a beginning framework of what you might see and what the creators of this model said positive or recreation therapy can really improve well-being in physical, cognitive, social, psychological development of resources to improve well-being in these areas, including environmental, physical, cognitive, social, and psychological are what were included in this original model. And then later they add in spiritual and kind of change up environmental, but we'll get into that. So one of our medial goals to reach well-being and positive emotion and experience is enhancing leisure experience. And then they have all of these different things that they say can enhance leisure experience. So savoring leisure, this is like purposefully bask in leisure, extend positive emotions you have from leisure. Basically, you want to
enjoy what you're doing.
Yeah, enjoy what you're doing and help them enjoy it longer. And so and help them kind of reflect on, wasn't that a great experience, and kind of anticipate and just, I guess, increase the enjoyment for leisure to be not just when it's happening, but before and after. Authentic leisure is doing leisure that makes you happy and uses your strengths. So in my school, and Carol and I would talk about this when we worked together, are pet programs or like programs that we like that maybe we are pushing because we enjoy them, but maybe aren't necessarily the best for the clients. We were always like trying to make sure, like, okay, is this because I think it's really good, or is this because it will actually be good for these clients? Like there's definitely things that sometimes we get really excited about. An example, not in TR, but just like in my family, I really, really enjoy cycling. And my sister, she's my older sister. We were like best friends since my birth, but she does not like biking. And so when and by not like biking, like she does not like biking. It does not make her happy. And so if I am trying to create a program for her, even though I love it, and even though I think that there's great things about it, and like all of these things, this would not be authentic leisure for her. And maybe someday it could be, but that's not the point, is what they're saying here. Is you don't have to take your dream and say, I just really want you to be a cyclist, and push them towards that. We want to find leisure that help individuals identify, select, and engage in leisure experiences that reflect their interests, their strengths, and their aptitudes. So also this could also be like, if a client only knows one form of leisure because of their disability, maybe they were taught one form of leisure and they don't like it, then authentic leisure can open up like, hey, there's more options for you, and maybe they can find something that they enjoy. Leisure gratifications, think flow. There's kind of two of these that go into flow. So leisure gratifications is like the flow where challenge meets ability, and it really focuses on leisure is increasing my skills and my self-efficacy. So you're learning to choose leisure that support the ongoing development of skills so that you're continually getting better. And then the other part of flow is the mindful leisure, which is like being able to engage in leisure that you're fully present in the moment. So learning to select and engage in leisure experiences that support full engagement, in the present moment. I just said that. So yeah. And then virtuous leisure is this idea that leisure experiences are enhanced if we're using one's strengths and leisure experiences to make a contribution to the world in some way. If we're providing some sort of service or benefiting the bigger picture, and it could be like big world or community or family, but just using it to make it more meaningful. So those are the different categories of leisure that they kind of, I guess they break it down and, make each of those meaningful in this model. And then we have the developing resources. So in this model, they say that, you will increase your social, physical, or the goal is that you'll increase your physical, cognitive, social, and psychological skills and resources by engaging in leisure. And in this model, they also include environmental resources as like an individual resource. So environmental resources is like community engagement and empowerment, physical resources, your physical health, your physical fitness. These are all things that leisure is helping to increase. And these are all things that as they're increased, leisure gets better. So they're very reflective in this way. Cognitive resources, your memory increases, better concentration, social resources, communication skills, interpersonal skills, psychological resources, self-awareness, autonomy, optimism. So anyway, all of these things, those individual resources we're not going to go into too much because I think you spend enough time talking about well-being and you can kind of come up with those. But the big thing that I want to let you know in this model, setting up for the Flourishing Through Leisure model, is that it was important to them, and they say this in their study, that they add environmental resources in, because before this we were kind of, maybe we had a tendency to look at individuals as like an island and say, okay, how can we help you, but not look at the bigger picture of what's going on with your family, what resources are actually available to you, where do you live, are we bringing you to a clinic to learn adaptive surfing when you live in a landlocked state and are never actually going to go surfing in your regular life, or are we encouraging leisure that you actually cannot afford, or it's cold where you are, and so being outside, like all of these things, maybe we're not looking at the full picture. So this model says, hey, we need to look at the full picture. As we go through the Flourishing Through Leisure model, they take the environmental out of like these individual skills to develop and say there is an environmental resource for all of these. We need to look at the environment in a social context, in a physical context, in a psychological context. So that's kind of where that builds on. So that is the leisure well-being model. That's where it starts. And now we'll move to the Flourishing Through Leisure model. And it sounds like a joke. It's about a person, a house, and a flower pot. A flower. So, Kara, go ahead.
If you learned about this model in school, you may remember that the graphic has a person standing up, raising their arms over their head. There's what looks like an arrow, but it's actually a house going up on one side of the model. And then the part that I think stands out the most to me when I learned about this in school was the flower pot, because you're like, look at this model that we're learning about for this healthcare job. And it's a flower with each petal of the flower representing a different aspect of well-being, being all the different domains of leisure. So that's the model we're talking about. And if you're
a visual learner,
yes, if you're having a hard time grasping what we are talking about learning, you can go to our show notes on www.realtalkrecreationtherapy.com, where we will have these models displayed. So when you're listening to this podcast episode, it'll make a little bit more sense. And hopefully the way that we describe them will also help you kind of work your way through that. So out of the leisure well-being model, taking more consideration onto the ecological aspect of a person's life, like we're recognizing that now this person is not an island, this person is very much a product of their environment, and therefore we do have to consider those ecological resources as well. We have the Flourishing Through Leisure model, and it has a longer name than that.
Oh yeah, it's the
Flourishing Through Leisure model and ecological extension of the leisure well-being model. So that tells you how this model came to be out of the leisure well-being model. And evidently the reason for this was that as positive psychology continued to develop, they determined that adding onto it would be beneficial to the practice of recreation therapy. So this model looks at building up strengths, using resources, to contribute to well-being. And the overall goal is this idea of a flourishing life, which if you scroll down, I have the definition of flourishing per positive psychologists. So flourishing, according to Dr. Martin Seligman, who is the founding father of positive psychology of flourishing, is that you're having positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishments, also known as PERMA. And Dr. Lynn Sutz, who is a positive psychologist, defines flourishing as the product of the pursuit and engagement of an authentic life that brings inner joy and happiness through meeting goals, being connected with life passions, and relishing in accomplishments through the peaks and valleys of life. So the idea of this model is that the overall goal of recreation therapy is to allow a person to flourish. And the way that a person flourishes is that they are taking into account all these different realms of well-being. So the one side of the model, the flower, is what the client gets out of recreation therapy. It's their well-being, their flourishing. And the left side of the model, which is the person and the house, is what the recreation therapist does. So when you look at a model like the leisure ability model, you can kind of see how a recreation therapist will like track through the entire model working with the client. With this model, I feel like it's kind of just a big picture of what recreation therapy is. And a lot of times a rec therapist might be working on multiple different areas within the strengths and the resources, but they also could just be focusing on one area because the client may not necessarily need to work on that area. And because it's positive psychology based, the idea is that it's a very strengths-based approach. So we are going to focus on the things that the client already does well, the things that their client is already doing to kind of build up their ability to accomplish things. And then in turn, it should help support the weaknesses to get stronger.
Right. So like positive psychology says that we don't have to always attack weaknesses and say like, oh, this is really bad. Let's like hyper focus on this part that's really hard. It says, let's focus on what is going well, and that will increase flourishing or well-being in all areas of life. So that's a really cool part of this model, is that it really emphasizes increasing or facilitation of strength in the practice. And like Carol said, I really like that it isn't like a chronological model the way maybe the first two models that we discussed were. So in the original ones, they were very like, okay, you start here, and then once they progress enough, then you do this, and then you do this. But like Carol says, we're working with people in all different areas, and maybe they're progressing more in one area than another. And so in these models and the Flourishing Through Leisure model, we're going to be working, no matter where you're at in the spectrum, we can use this model to work with people right now doing the things. So it's kind of nice.
Yeah, so if you're looking at the model, you see the two sides of the model. I said how the left side is what the recreation therapist does, and the right side is the outcome that the participant experiences. And so everything that the recreation therapist does is impacted by the participant's goals, dreams, and aspirations. So because this is a very client-centered, strengths-based approach, we as recreation therapists should be doing our interventions based off of what our client wants to work on, what they enjoy doing, what they see themselves doing. So kind of in a medical model, you'd see like the therapist is the one that is directing everything that's going on. Here, we're really trying to give that client that larger sense of control with like, we are working towards what they want to work towards. We are helping them accomplish their dreams and maybe focusing on the things that they're passionate about, which is more strengths-based, and we're just looking at what's wrong with you and trying to fix it. So the different aspects of this model on the left side, where we look at what the recreation therapist does. First, we have enhancing the leisure experience, which you'll remember from the leisure well-being model. It has a lot of the aspects of the facilitation of leisure skills and knowledge. That would be where the recreation therapist is helping the client to savor leisure, to experience authentic leisure, to experience leisure gratifications. They also focus on mindful leisure, which is this idea that we're kind of being fully present and engaged in the leisure that we're doing, kind of like flow. Also experiencing virtuous leisure. We're looking at their interests, their preference, their talents, their skills. all that good stuff. That is what the recreation therapist is doing as far as like facilitating those leisure skills. So if I'm comparing this to the leisure ability model, I kind of think about leisure education as a big part of enhancing the leisure experience. The recreation therapist also looks at the facilitation of leisure environments, which, depending on where you're at, if you're in a more hospital setting, you might not be able to control what the environment looks like a lot. So a big part of this is giving the clients choice. It says real choice for leisure. That's where we're not necessarily forcing people to do activities or doing activities that they don't like, but we're trying to give them the strength and the ability to choose if they want to participate in leisure, what they want to do. We're also kind of looking at,
I was gonna just add to that, like the real choices, like that also includes no point in taking someone surfing if they live in Wyoming, right? And are going to spend like if they're not going to live by an ocean, or they don't have, or they cannot afford to, buy this fancy equipment, this kind of thing. Like this takes all of that into account when you're enhancing those leisure experiences. Like, is it reasonable?
Yeah, they call it typical lifestyle rhythms, where we're going to take clients to places that they'll actually be living in, actually be recreating in, so that when they are doing their recreation without a therapist, then they'll kind of have an idea of what that actually looks like. It also takes into consideration the person's social supports and how, like, for example, if you need assistance getting to a recreational event, like who is it that in your life that's going to help you get to that sports game, or that's going to help you navigate the bus system so that you'll be able to go and join your bridge club or whatever. We'll also look at inclusive environments, how accessible environments are physically, how inclusive different programs are, and just all those things that environmentally allow for people to actually participate in leisure. So that is the enhancing leisure part of the model. So then the next aspect of the model, again, under what the recreation therapist does, is the facilitation of strengths and the facilitation of resources. So in the leisure well-being model, we really just focus, it says it's resources, but what they were focusing on was the strengths in each of the domains. So there's like facilitation of psychological and emotional strengths, facilitation of cognitive strengths, social strengths, physical strengths, and spiritual strengths. So the leisure well-being model focused on just those strengths with the individual. Now, the flourishing through leisure model expands upon not only developing that individual person's strengths, but also developing that person's resources within that domain as they relate to the environment. So a good example of this, because this might be a little bit confusing, especially if you're not looking at the model, is when we are working with a client on developing their physical strength. So we're working on their physical health, we're working on their mobility, we're helping them to improve their fitness through gaining strength. All those things we are also looking at, okay, as you are exercising, as you're improving your physical strengths, you need to have a safe place where you can do that. The design of that place needs to be universal. So like, how can we give our clients spaces that they can find in many places that are going to be, I guess, available to them? But yeah, so they need to be in a safe place. There needs to be adaptive equipment that they'll actually be able to use, because some of our clients may have disabilities where the typical equipment that you would find in their average gym may not be accessible for them with their current level of functioning. We want what they're doing to be affordable. Maybe we can help them develop resources at home that will allow them to improve upon their physical strengths. And we can also look at the communities that they live in to be able to identify where they can engage in recreation that will support their physical strengths. And I feel like the physical domain is always the easiest to understand because it's very easy to observe. Like, it's hard to observe emotions, but we can observe a person's physical strength improving. So if you look at that model, you can kind of see where not only as recreation therapists are we working on that individual's health physically, but we're also working on helping them understand where they can go, what do they need to be successful to improve their physical health.
Yeah, it's really nice in this model, the way they break up and say, okay, yeah, like what resources, like what emotional resources do you need so that I can help facilitate the developing of these emotional strengths so that it can contribute to your psychological and emotional well-being. It's helpful to be able to divide them up and say, okay, because less likely to overlook something, right? Like I think about like working with teenagers in treatment and how a lot of times you take them out of their environment, like if it's an inpatient facility, right? You take people out of their environment and work on developing strengths, but then if you put them back in their environment without facilitating the development of resources, then it's not nearly as effective if you take a person that did really, really great in one environment and stick them in a completely different environment. It's important to recognize like, hey, that's actually, and the same thing with the military, right, Carol? Like we worked with soldiers that were used to all of these supports in the military, and they were beginning to transition to getting out of the military because they were medically retiring. And so there was a lot of conversation about what supports would still be there after they left, right? What does the VA have for you? What does the community have for you? That was a big thing because they were so used to having all of these wonderful supports that the military provided for them. To have that, to be getting out and to have that go away can be really scary and does not, you can be doing really well with all of those military supports, and as soon as it's gone, like your well-being is going to suffer because you don't have those resources anymore. And so I think this is really big for people who just got injured and are in rehab. Like we have a friend, right? Our friend Christy Smith works at Craig Hospital, and a huge part of her job is just discussing with the participants what they're going to want to be doing in the community after they leave rehab, and being able to find those resources and supports for them. That's a huge part of what she does. And so continuing to say like this is a really important thing if you haven't worked with clients yet or haven't thought about this isn't something to be overlooked or neglected. And that's why I think now it's a whole third main part of this model. Like it's the whole house.
Yeah.
The model.
Yeah. The resources is really important, especially when you're working with a population that is going through a significant transition, which a lot of people are. Like if you're working with the elderly population in geriatrics, those people are transitioning from a life that they were more independent to a life where they're becoming more and more dependent on other people, on the healthcare system if they're living in a nursing home, on their support system. So that's a transition where they're going to have to learn new resources. And if you're working with people who have acquired a physical disability, well, now their life is going to look a lot different, and the resources that they need are going to look a lot different. So now we're looking at, okay, how can we determine what accessible resources that you need? How can we find them? If you're working with the mental health population, a lot of those people maybe do not have a lot of these resources that would allow them to have a good, solid support system. So social resources like peer support, people they can talk to who get it, who've gone through what they've been going through, just knowing where are the safe places that they can go and be and engage in recreation and find support and find other people that will be there when they're having a hard time. Yeah, basically we work with a lot of people that are experiencing transitions where they need to relearn or learn resources that are going to support them to be able to continue to participate in recreation. And then, according to this model, continue to grow in all the different aspects of health and well-being. The thing that's crazy about this model is it's way more detailed and way more in depth than the other models that we've talked about. If you think about the leisure ability model, it seems very, very basic compared to this model because it has so much information and so much like specific things. But the thing that I like about this model is that when you're a recreational therapist, it kind of gives you a good idea of like all the different things that you possibly could be doing. And some of them don't necessarily feel like recreation or look like recreation, but they're allowing us to get our clients ready to go out and participate in recreation independently.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge part, right? Because if we are only focused on the recreation and we're not looking at all of these things, then we're not giving them the ability to actually do leisure independently, right? If we only focus on providing positive leisure experiences and increasing leisure well-being, then when all of these other areas suffer, then it's like if one part of the flower gets poisoned. There's so many analogies, right? There's so many like images, and if you're a visual learner in this, like if your soil isn't good, then the flower won't grow. Anyway, like if this
that's why we have the picture of the man. We're strengthening the human body by developing their strengths. That's why you have the picture of the house. We're like building up this person's resource, which is kind of like, I guess, for the sake of having a metaphor, it's like your community. We're building that community where you have everything that you need to be successful, and then the flower is growing.
Yes.
Yeah, because like some of the strengths you're working on with people are things like communication skills, or cognitively you might be working on their memory or their problem solving or goal setting. Spiritually, you might be working on allowing them to experience peace of mind or their ability to reflect on different things. And all of these contribute to their ability to enjoy leisure and to successfully participate in leisure. They themselves are not necessarily recreational.
And if you're wondering, like, can this model work for someone who's more leisure focused in the same way? Like, say you're not working in a hospital setting, or you're not trying to necessarily like promote health. Like, does this still work? And I would say yes, because even if your thing is, I want to have a camp, a leisure camp, like for people with disabilities, just so they can have fun, just so they can recreate. But in doing that, in making that possible, you've got to look at what their environment is providing for them, and the resources and strengths that they have will contribute to their positive experiences at this camp. And so it does all work together. You don't have to be medical focused to use this model. You don't have to be leisure focused to use this model. It's nice the way it all works together. And like Carol said, it's coming from the other two models or like the original two models that we discussed, the leisure ability and health promotion, health protection model. It seems like so much information, but you can look at this and pull out things that are useful. And where the other ones, the complaint was there's not enough, that this is a good response to that. I think like, well, there isn't enough like explanation of what that means. Well, here's an explanation of what it means. And you can also like read the books about positive psychology to like really get what we're going for here.
Yeah. I think the next time someone asks me, what do you do as a recreational therapist? Like, what is that? I would love to have a picture of the Flourishing through leisure model to be like, let's break it down. This is exactly the sort of thing that I work on. These are the type of skills and these are the type of resources. And then through working with my clients to develop their goals, we're going to work on enhancing their well-being within these 6 domains. So if you're looking at the model, we move to the right side then. And the right side of the model is that beautiful flower. And it kind of shows you what a flourishing life should look like. So that's where increasing that person's psychological and emotional well-being, their leisure well-being, cognitive well-being, physical well-being, spiritual well-being, and social well-being will all together holistically contribute to that person's overall well-being, which is experiencing a state of successful, satisfying, and productive engagement in their lives. The other cool thing about this model is that they use I statements under each domain's like definition of well-being. So for example, cognitive well-being, it says, I think in a focused way and learn eagerly. It's such a nice way to kind of show how this model is client-centered and strengths-based, because we're speaking from the perspective of the client. And it kind of helps you understand like what is the overall goal that we are working towards when we're working with someone on their cognitive well-being or their physical well-being or their spiritual well-being. But yeah, all of those things working together all contribute to that idea of well-being. And when a person is able to experience well-being in all of these domains, then we can say that they're having a flourishing life. Which does all sound very, very rosy and very perfect worldview. But as a recreational therapist, we may have lofty goals, but that doesn't mean that working towards a person's overall well-being will not contribute to them improving their quality of life.
Yeah, and I think it also just speaks to like, we can jump into this practice at anywhere where you are in your life. Like, you don't have to be, this isn't the medical model, right, where we're trying to get you from being sick to getting better. Like this is just improving life, and that can work with anyone at any level they're at. Maybe they're doing really good, but they need more support in one area or another. I think I like it.
Yes, we love the flourishing through leisure model. And I feel like the name of that model just feels very recreation therapy-esque.
Yeah, for sure. And it's nice too, because if you're looking at this from the API process, right, and trying to think, okay, what kind of assessments can I do to help me understand what the participants' goals, dreams, and aspirations are, you can use the quality of life BREF assessment, and that's going to cover these domains. And there's several other questionnaires, assessments that are going to look at well-being and an environment to be able to like identify what is working, what is not working. We always talk about the Ideal Arbor Leisure Battery because that's what we used. And I just
nice
need
assessment.
more recreation therapy experiences to use other ones. But when we used that model, we would look at all of these things and be able to identify, okay, like this is one of your strengths, these are resources that you're lacking, these are or resources that we can help provide for you or help you find, and you really want to work on your social well-being, you really want to be able to increase that social support and relate well with others and belong and to valued social groups like or whatever their goals were, and be able to really like tailor it to them. So I like it too. That you can also, the VIA character strengths is going to be fabulous for looking at for helping to identify a person's strengths that they already have, and then being able to facilitate the use of those to increase other strengths, to increase well-being. So it's a solid model, and I feel like discussing positive psychology would maybe be if you're still trying to like wrap your head around what all of this means, I would say read Flourish by Dr. Martin Seligman, because it will go through all of PERMA and talk about like what is a flourishing life, what is the psychological benefits of having positive emotion, engagement, positive relationships, meaning, and accomplishment in your life. So
yeah, I also think this would be a really interesting recreation therapy session to have with your clients, depending on what clients you work with. But if you had clients that were at a cognitive level where they could understand what it means to develop strengths, really talk about what resources in their lives, I would almost be interested to sit down with those clients and be like, let's talk about this model and how it relates to your life, and like what aspects of it do you feel like you need to work on. And I feel like it just paints a really nice picture of what we as recreation therapists are working towards with our clients. So I don't know, maybe I'll try it with some of my clients and see if they could gain more understanding of how their own well-being can be influenced by all these different aspects.
Yeah, well, and you can have them like identify the resources that they're lacking, right? Like, and say like, you know what? Yeah, I totally don't have like the social support. And so then it can help like going back in and saying, okay, well, like this could be why well-being is, this is a way we can support your well-being, right? Is to find these supports for you, find these community resources for you, and identify that these actually will help. Because I think sometimes I maybe, when I'm upset or struggling or at my very like not the same level
when you're
that
not
our clients are
regulating,
experiencing. Yes. But when I'm feeling dysregulated, when I'm upset, maybe sometimes I look inward and I think it's all about me and that I am just like deficient in these areas. But being able to look at what are their strengths and what are their resources can maybe really help. I know it helped our soldiers, right? When we were working, it helped to be able to identify what's going right and what do you have going for you, and how can we help you use what you have going for you to increase what you have in these other areas. It was really fun talking to the soldiers about that area, talking to them about their resources and kind of identifying together that maybe they had more resources than they realized they had.
Yeah, so that is the flourishing through leisure and ecological extension of the leisure and well-being model. and also the leisure well-being model. And again, you'll be able to find the actual pictures of these models on our show notes. But we just want to thank you guys for listening to this episode on models. And if you feel like you have done work where you were able to like see this model at work, we would love to hear about a story of how you actually put these models into play in your rec therapy practice. I think that'd be really neat to hear about.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you next time.
All right, everybody. As always, thank you so much for listening to another episode of Real Talk Recreation Therapy. If you're looking for some of the information that we talked about today, you can find it on our show notes at www.realtalkrecreationtherapy.com. And if you enjoyed this episode and some of the other episodes we put out, we would love to have you like, follow, subscribe, rate, and review our podcast on whatever podcast platform you listen to us on. Thank you so much for your support, and we hope you'll join us for the next episode. Bye!